Okay, welcome again to the July installment of the Alta Mesa Center reading series. We are privileged today to have Toni Mirosevich in conversation with Ploi Pirapokin, whose work is just astounding, both of them. I've read them both in Catapult and other places. And even before I encountered Toni's work, I'd encountered it in essay form in Catapult. So I was very happy to get her book in hand. A little bit about Alta Mesa Center for the Arts. We are an interfaith arts and spirituality hub housed within and sponsored by Orinda Community Church. We believe that art is a spiritual act and a human right. We wish to provide a space where people from diverse traditions, artistic practices, and economic realities come together in community. We know that art can bridge the divisions, substantive and arbitrary, that divide us. We come together not only to practice and teach the arts, but to celebrate and learn from our differences and to foster lively and respectful interdisciplinary dialogues. We seek unity in diversity. Now, wherever you are on your artistic or your spiritual journeys, whoever you are always welcome here. Now, Toni Mirosevich grew up in a Croatian American fishing family in Everett, Washington, and Spell Heaven here is her most recent book of short stories out of the wonderful Counterpoint Press. Previous books are Pink Harvest, which won the Creative Nonfiction Award for first series and a Lambda Literary Award finalist. The Takeaway Bin, Queer Street, Oblique Strangers, The Rooms We Make Our Own, and Trio, Toni Mirosevich, Charlotte Muse, and Edward Smallfield, which is that after the musical trio of Emmylou Harris? I'll have to ask that later. She's also an alumni of McDowell and Hedgebrook, Blue Mountain Center, Derossi Residency, and artist programs, and other creative writing residencies. After many early years working in various labor jobs, she began to teach in creative writing at San Francisco State at University in 1991. She is now happily, I think, a professor emeriti of SFSU, got my words in order there, and lives with her wife in California. And Ploi Pirapokin is the nonfiction editor at Newfound Journal and the co-editor of The Greenest Gecko, an anthology of new Asian fantasy forthcoming from Wesleyan University Press. Her work is featured in Tor.com, Pleiades, Ninth Letter, Sycamore Review, Gulf Street Magazine, and more. And in the chat in just a moment, I'll put the program so you can find everybody's website and you can poke around and find infinitely more information if you want. Now, we're oddly situated here in July and August. We have books that celebrate encounters in some sort. The next book we look at is this is coming in August, about a poetic encounter. But as I was reading Spell Heaven, what struck me again and again is that it speaks to the fear and the courage it takes to make meaningful encounters with strangers, people we don't know, people who we make assumptions about and assume, probably rightly, are making assumptions about us. The narrator moves into a town, and then while it takes time for her to shift from outsider to citizen, that story was infinitely charming to me. And I'm thrilled to introduce you to Toni, who's going to talk more about the book, and Ploi, who's going to speak with her about the process. And then at the end, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Please feel free to use the chat feature to put questions in the margins. You can shout in the chat your favorite lines as you wish, but it's a pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.
It is. I just love hearing you talk, Mary. That was just a beautiful intro. It was lovely to hear that. So and thank you for having me and for having Ploi. I'm just honored to be here and to be in this series and to have you accept this book as something that we could chat about. And of course, then Ploi is extraordinary, which you're soon going to find out if you don't already know. So you gave Mary a good kind of view of a little bit about the book. I'm going to just give a little story about what the stories are about as well. And the best way I know how to do it is to start by saying that I saw a sign once at the beach down here where I live. And it was a sign on a post, and it said, this is what was on the sign: "I've lost something. I don't know what it is. Can you help me find it?" And I thought that is just the perfect way to describe what this book is about, in that there's a narrator who with her wife moves to a coastal town that's very down in the heels at the time. And she's looking for something, but she isn't quite sure what it is. She's in academia. That's not the most comfortable world for her, and because she grew up in a working class fishing family. So it's very, it's a strange world, and she's looking for what? Community or meaning, or to feel less lonely in the world. There's a quote at the start of the book by C.D. Wright, and it's, "You will wake up in a dear yet unfamiliar place." And I love that quote. You will wake up in a dear yet unfamiliar place. And so I think this narrator, she goes to the sea, which is familiar from her upbringing, but it's also unfamiliar because she doesn't know this world yet. She doesn't know those strangers yet. So I'm going to read a little bit of a start, and then we're going to, then Ploi and I are going to chat. Okay, Ploi? Okay. This is the start of the title story, Spell Heaven. When you're lost and looking for a sign, an omen, a clue. When the wishbone pull doesn't yield the lucky stem. When you no longer believe in heaven or hell, past lives or future, yet still hope for a hint, some shred of evidence, a piece of shining raiment, a lucky card that blows your way, offering something, a way forward, an escape plan. Whether you're feeling down due to a recent slight or a spate of misfortune, or the knowledge that melancholy has seeped into your bones, never coming in like gangbusters, but sneaking around the edges of the frame, a grayness that blankets the perimeter of the skin, then moves towards the heart, the lungs, journeys to the center of your earth, enters and takes up residence, then it's down to the sea for a walk, to the sea, the cure-all, end-all. I make my way along the promenade that stretches the length of the beach. The sea, as usual, is making a show of it. Some days gray and moody, some days black and blue, some days mossy green, as if a lawn lay just underneath the surface. On others, a deep rusty brown of a red tide, a phytoplankton flash mob. Sometimes the wind tears white bits off the top of each wave, sending hundreds of surrender flags into the air. But today it's mild, baby blue, and with round, roly-poly waves that don't break so much as slide into shore, hesitate, reconsider, then decide to slide back out again. There in the distance, the pier, a concrete span, like a left-handed margin, left justified, and I am justified in being here. At the pier's entrance past the flagpole, today the flag hangs as limp as, say it, a dish rag. Past the Chat and Chew Cafe, there's a short flight of 3 steps, and you step onto the pier as if stepping onto a jet about to take off up and over the cabin door. Yet isn't there the slightest hesitation before leaving the known behind, a worry that flickers, is this a good idea? Until you get nudged by a guy who bumps into you from behind with his crab cart. Sorry, lady, but damn, what are you waiting for? Christmas, let's get going. This morning, something sends me back to that initial hesitation, that flickering worry. I've felt it before, when I hesitated before taking that first step into the adult world and quickly stepped back. But I've grown tired of stasis. I'm looking for something to lift me. I want the catch to end all catches, and each day like faith, still here, the pier, the sea, only out here, no worry to tie, only out here, no worry to bind. Something urges me forward as if towards some faint memory, there, just beyond my reach. And just like that, I'm on. I take the first step on board, can feel the sway of the waves beneath me. This is as close as I'll get to the captain's day, suspended above the ocean. Every day the pier crew casts off and casts out and then waits and waits. It's possible, isn't it? Tell me it is. You can have a life where whatever you catch brings you joy. It happened here before on this very pier. Once I came upon a man holding a plastic baggie full of cooked pink shrimp, big tiger prawns, huge pink commas, maybe his lunch, maybe bait. He'd take one out of the bag, hold it up for the gulls circling above his head, who, seeing the offering, for a minute stayed stationary in the air, then dropped like helicopters on a mission straight down, close but not close enough. So he threw the shrimp upward, flung it skyward. If a gull timed it right and caught it, the man laughed. And when the gull missed, the man laughed. And then he went one better. He held the shrimp between his fingers, an extra digit. A gull descended, perfect timing, snatched the shrimp, then lifted off, the pink hook hanging out of the gull's bill, the white feathers lifting, the blue sky. Then again, I've been here on days when plenty didn't happen, nothing extraordinary, or I missed it because I was on the lookout for the extraordinary. And there was nothing special, except the fact that I was here, or here I was, on the shaking West Coast, out on the walk above the water, not on it. I bested Jesus. If you look at it that way, it was just another day on earth, another walk. So the narrator starts walking and she comes upon these strangers, and she, of course, she has something to learn. She might teach at a university, but she has a bit to learn. She has a bit to learn. She doesn't know what she needs to learn. She doesn't know what she's looking for, but she knows that meeting these strangers and opening up to them might help. So let me stop there, Ploi, okay? And again, let's you and I chat. Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for signing on your Sunday afternoon. Mary, of course, for hosting, and Toni for giving me this opportunity to be in conversation with you and out to dear friends, old and new, what it was like being your student at San Francisco State's MFA program. Of course, every time I meet another San Francisco State alumni from the MFA program, we always talk about how instrumental you were to our writing, not only by sharing your lived experiences in class with us as lessons, as we sort of hung on and tried to figure out, well, how will this fit into something? And it always unearths for us depth within our own process of writing that we didn't think was possible, and also possible in a way that makes sense in, I think, our narrative in writing and the career aspect of, well, everyone just needs to do these things. I think you expand and gave us so many different paths with your own work. And the other thing that I thought was really important to the process of the story collection, as we were talking to, was giving yourself time to marinate and breathe with stories that you turn back to again and again. One of the advice that you gave me that stuck with me a long time was at my first residency, I remember emailing you and saying, I feel like I'm wasting time, that I'm here at this beautiful upstate New York place and I'm just not writing. I'm reading, I'm walking and thinking. And I remember you wrote back saying, when I was at McDowell, I was just kicking a soccer ball around for most of my time there. And it was fruitful. And I guess to lead into the first question with these stories, how did you arrive at this collection, and what were some of the stories and characters you couldn't stop overturning and wanting to dive deeper into?
That is so great. I forgot about the soccer ball. And I forgot that I ever wrote that to you too. But really, you were supposed to go there and you were supposed to work, and there was some work that was done, but by the middle of the day, it was like, oh my God, let me just kick a soccer ball around. So I found one at a children's park or something. It was very fun. How the collection came to be, I was thinking about it, and there's this great story that was in an interview with W.G. Sebald. And he was talking about writing. And he said, I think he was talking about his process. And he said, it's like there's this, a dog is looking for a bone, okay? So there's this field, and the bone is hidden somewhere. And the dog doesn't go from here on a straight line to where that bone is. The dog does this, goes all around and is sniffing around, and then finally finds it. And he called it unsystematic searching. And I thought that is just the very best way to describe it. Like, there's this searching that happens for some reason, whether or not you've lost something or you're trying to find something that you don't know what it is. And the unsystematic searching in the writing is not plotted, it's not planned, it's not organized, I hate to say. And the collection wasn't that done that way either. It was the Croatian term from my family is malo po malo, so which is little by little, which is my grandmother said, if you're upset, go outside, dig in the dirt, malo po malo, little by little. So the collection is really, it just started to grow malo po malo unsystematically, in that the narrator starts taking these walks, and each person that she meets ends up being fascinating and interesting, but she has to learn that she better open up in some way if she's going to ever meet them and understand that her assumptions are wrong about people. Your first assumption, oh, well, there's a drunk on the bench. Well, he's a drunk, he doesn't have a life. Or, oh, there's a woman and she looks like she's on drugs, and it looks like she's maybe living in her truck with her kid, and I'm worried about the kid. Well, I have all kinds of assumptions about it. So the narrator needs to move past that. And I think that if there's any theme that keeps coming back, it's that the narrator has something to learn. And she's not going to learn it in academia. She's going to probably learn it by the sea in a group of outsiders. That's really actually kind of what happened. Does that help? Does that answer something?
I love the slip of the narrator needs and I need, because I think this is something else that was very exciting and interesting for me, considering you've written so many beautiful essays and poems, and this is your first debutante moment in fiction. And yet there is this sort of blend, it's realism, obviously, I'm sure some meanings are fictionalized for the purpose of the story, but how does this fluidity make it possible for you to also come to this collection?
I think, almost all of the stories are inspired by real life events, but it really, where the fictionalizing comes in is that the narrator has to, there's a quote by Toni Morrison, to vault the mere blue air that separates us. To do that, she has to use her imagination to ford that distance between her and herself and strangers. And that's fictionalized. It's like you have to fictionalize who that person might be and who the narrator might be in response. So there's that that happens. I've never been very strict about the genres. I mean, you remember this. I kind of like, I was teaching creative nonfiction. I said, well, you define it. And actually, I'm going to go to you, Ploi, in just a minute. But it's kind of like, I think that if you allow yourself a kind of fluid range so that the imagination can come in, real life events can come in, poetic rhythms can come in, that genre can come in. If you allow all of that to happen, then you kind of have a little bit of a hybrid of the different genres. I wanted to, this isn't going to work on the screen, but the title of the book, Spell Heaven, is because in real life, I picked up a note that was on the pier, and it's this little tiny little scrap of paper, and it's this kid trying to spell heaven. And it's like, dear God. And there's like 7 different attempts to spell heaven. And there's only one that's right. It's like Hevin, Hevaane. It's like the kid didn't know how to spell heaven. But from this scrap, the story came. So so there's real and not real and the imagination and all of that. So yeah, I mean, how would you, because you write both too, Ploi. So don't leave me on the hook with this. Like what I'd love to hear.
I will say I cheat a little because my fiction is speculative. So it's the umbrella term for science fiction and fantasy. And I think that genre allows me to really push on my metaphors to intensify what I'm writing. And then my nonfiction is just direct thought. And I think that's one thing where I'm looking at writers like yourself who are able to maintain this consistent style, that's like, this is a very Toni story because there's elements of repetition. There's these gorgeous images that develop over time. Whereas I'm sort of like one shot, one story, one essay. So I'm always so curious, when you put together something, what are the threads that you found made these pieces belong together? Of course you have the narrator throughout over time, over decades. But what some of the images about the water, the phytoplankton, glass, how that came about for you as well.
Yeah. I do think that there is a kind of a narrative arc where and because they were written over time, that narrator does slowly come to understand that she needs to move closer to people. And so that does occur. But also, I think that, here's an example. The first poetry book I ever wrote, the editor wrote back to me and said, why so much sea green? Why over and over and over again? So I took a few of those out, but there are certain images and rhythms that are just, it's like they're in the body. I used to teach a class called What the Body Knows at San Francisco State, which was a course I kind of made up. And the body, it's like there's certain images, especially from living by the sea and growing up around the sea, that I just keep coming back to. And certain rhythms also, because Croatian and English were spoken in the home, there's kind of a rhythmic kind of sound pattern that happens when I think 2 languages are spoken in the home sometimes. Mm-hmm. And that's also, it's in the body and in the memory. So those things keep coming back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so why a short story collection now at this stage? Perhaps you are happier as a professor emeriti.
Well, why this story now, Ploi, is that someone took it. Just it's good when they take it. So I'm very happy with Counterpoint and that they decided to do the book. And I had just been slowly working at stories for a long time. I started out as a poet. I hadn't written. My last poetry book was, I think, 2010. So it had been a while. But I really I just felt that these stories kind of finally came together, and I was really, really happy that it was taken. I loved teaching, as you well know, and I loved being in the classroom, and it was like nothing else, because sometimes it felt like you would be in that class and think conversations would happen there that happened nowhere else, and especially if we weren't locked down into some kind of like, it's got to be this way. It was extraordinary. So, but now I am pretty happy outside. I'm pretty happy with the band of outsiders here. So I know I'm lucky. I'm very fortunate. As I have said at some other reading, that I got to retire. I'm a very, very fortunate person.
And for maybe those who have not purchased the book yet, what is your favorite story in the book, in writing and in thinking about, so that when they purchase it, they can perhaps read it out of order in Toni's style of reading?
I am the story, there's some stories that that are important in that they were hard to write. There's a woman who, again, out of the real life, we met at the beach, and she was very conservative, and watched Fox News and thought Trump was fabulous. And she also had a very good heart. And trying to write that story was really hard. Trying to ford the distance to vault the mirror blue air that separated us was difficult. So there are stories that are favorite because they're hard to write. And then there are stories like Who I Used to Be, about which is because I feel like we all used to be various people. And we still carry those people in us, and that's probably my favorite story.
Do you mind reading a little bit from that? Is it possible?
Well, funny you should ask, because I do happen to have that here.
Oh,
and I think I'd like to. So bear with me. And again, she meets a lot of different people, and this is one of the people that she meets. I can tell from the start of my walk on the beach promenade that he's at his spot, can spot the top of his faded baseball cap in the distance. The rest of his body is obscured by a concrete casement housing a trash can, but as I get closer, I see his legs crossed at the knee, his tan gams, his flip-flops. A few more steps and up pops his face, florid, flushed, eyes at half-mast, smile on full beam. He's where he is every day, all day, in his spot, at the end of a bench, kitty-cornered to the Chat and Shoe Cafe and the pier, where he holds forth, holds court, holds my attention whenever I pass. His spot. One morning a few months ago, I mentioned to Crystal, the counter person at the Chat and Shoe, that the guy sitting on the bench outside told me that the weather was about to change. Oh, you must have been talking to Tommy Bench, she says. That's what we call him. That's Tommy out there, and that's his bench. She went on to tell me that he was once a checker at Safeway. As soon as she said it, I remembered seeing him when my wife and I first moved to this town, standing behind the checkout counter, dressed in the official Safeway uniform, short sleeve shirt, navy blue apron, blue tie, shiny name badge, bantering with the customers as he scanned the groceries. Crystal says he lost that job and never found another. That was years ago. What does he live on now? I've noticed his buddies often bring him a can of beer when his supply gets low. Here's looking at you, kid, he once yelled out, then raised his can in a bag and toasted me as I passed by. Tommy and I have our own form of chit-chat. I'll say something about the weather or the local baseball team. What about those Giants? And he'll have some funny comeback. I laugh and give a short wave and carry on with my walk. I never hang around for a longer chat. My wife says this because I'm a solitary, but maybe it's that I just don't know where the conversation might lead. We're from different universities. We're from different worlds. I toss out writing lessons to students at the university, a privileged post. Tommy tosses out Volmer to the seagulls, his privileged perch. I worked a lot of blue collar jobs in the past, truck driver, laborer, swimming pool operator, attic insulation, but that was before I landed a job in the halls of academia. Would he and I have anything in common now? Something that would tip the scales in our favor. Tommy has colored up too. It's obvious he's a drinker, an alcoholic, or as my wife once called him, a drunkard. I told her drunkard was such an archaic word, that the word harkened back to Skid Row and Prohibition and songs like Little Brown Jug. Well, hearken isn't too modern now either, is it? She replied. The glassy eyes, the unfocused gaze, the slurred speech, the ever-present brown paper bag at his side crinkled around a beer can. There are the obvious signs. Tommy sits on his bench every morning and afternoon, deeply pickled, in a Hawaiian shirt, cargo pants, a baseball cap, dressed as if we're living in Southern California instead of the cool Northern California coast. Propped up against his bench is the driftwood walking stick he carries with him wherever he goes, more like a staff than a walking stick, like the staff a drunken apostle would use to lead his flock. There's Permit Man, who has a running feud with a brake repair shop near his house, something about the shop not having a permit. He made a plywood cutout of a not-so-cutesy clown, nailed it to his backyard fence that faces the shop. The cartoon bubble coming out of the clown's mouth reads, "Got permit? Call 1-800-SCUMBAG." There's the chewer who talks out loud to himself as he walks, a running stream of conspiracy theories about the government. Jesus Christ, Richard Nixon, Medicare fraud, who chews and spits sunflower seeds, leaving a trail of split seeds in his wake. There's Happy Day, who always says just those two words, only those two, whenever I see him. I hear he used to be a merchant marine. Every day, each one finds a spot on the bench to chat with Tommy, to chew the fat, shoot the breeze. Tommy's always at the head of that welcome wagon. He's always ready to share a sip and a smoke, is rarely alone on that set of bar stools. With a black magic marker, he's inked each person's name on the bench where they always sit, like place cards out for a fancy dinner party. A month later, it's late afternoon by the time I get down to the shore. I button up my jacket, start my walk, spy Tommy's cap in the distance. It would take an Arctic blast to keep him from his bench. When I reach him, I stop and say hey, and we start bullshitting about nothing important, how the Giants lost again, how they blew it in the ninth. I compliment him on his fall outfit, plaid flannel shirt, khaki Bermuda shorts, a royal blue baseball cap I haven't seen him wear before. This one sports the logo of the Golden State Warriors. The cap has a small tear in it. Like the cap, I say. Got it at Goodwill, as is, he says, pointing to the tear, like me. As is, I say, or is it as you were? I give him a quick salute and start to move on. Then I stop. I don't know why. My wife says I always have an exit strategy. Maybe it's this feeling I have about not wanting to get too close. Or it could be that only when I'm alone do I feel free to think my thoughts. Got something I want to show you, he says. He's slurring his speech a little, but I catch his drift. He reaches into his shirt pocket and pulls out a small square photograph. His hand is shaking as he holds the photo up to me. Here, take a look. I take the photo from his hand. Staring back at me, a handsome young guy in his 20s or 30s, full head of hair, big grin, clear-eyed, confident looking, the look of a guy who can handle whatever life throws at him. It's Tommy like I've never seen him, like I've never known him. I used to own a house, he says. Up on Sunset Ridge, beautiful deck and everything. The wife got that and everything else. I tried to picture him years ago in his prime with his dreams and hopes and plans for the future, with his life still ahead of me. Him, you cut quite a figure, I say and smile. But Tommy's not smiling. He looks at me straight in the eye, as if to say, look again, damn it. Look again. You're missing something. He gives a cough like he's clearing his throat. Then in a voice as serious as I've ever heard him use, he says, this is who I used to be. Who he used to be, not just a guy on this bench with half a can of beer hanging out with the rest of the beach gang, a man who had a life with a wife, a house, a job, responsibilities with cash coming in, a person with a pension plan and health coverage, and whatever other benefits a lifetime of indentured servitude to Safeway offers. As if I need more evidence, he lifts his shirt sleeve and there on his skinny forearm, a tattooed column of blue letters run down to his wrist. I try to decipher the code, but the letters don't combine to make up any word I know. One initial for the name of each member of my family, Mia Familia, he says proudly. A photo, an arm, the beer, the sea, who we used to be, who was the chewer in a former life, or permit man, or happy day, or me. I don't tell Tommy that I once worked all those blue collar jobs, then went to school, wrote some stories, and now teach at a university, that I never wanted to follow the rules, academic or otherwise, that I used to be married, then divorced, then came out and married the love of my life, that when I was young, I wanted to grow up and be a sea captain and watch the waves roll by, that I was once that person and that person and that person. And now this is who I am, a woman walking alone by the sea, a woman who's soon to call it a day on that cushy university gig, ready to leave it all behind. All of who I used to be is still here, tucked inside my shirt pocket, tucked inside this skin. A grocery clerk checker becomes a drunkard. A truck driver becomes a professor. A merchant marine becomes the minister of happiness. Transformers, every one of them. I hand his photo back to him and watch as he slips it back in his shirt pocket. He looks up and gives me a grin. There's nothing here to fear. What if I joined Tommy on the bench? If I sat right down next to him? If I didn't rush on and instead left behind my monkish ways? If I went to the local liquor store and brought back a bottle of Four Roses to share? What if, like the old-timey song, I hearkened back to another gentler time and realized there is no separation in the land beyond the sky? And then went a step further and believed there is no separation right here on earth. If I had a revelation like the monk Thomas Merton once had on the streets of Louisville, that he loved all the people, even those seeming strangers, that none of us were alien to each other. Would Tommy accept to be as is with the others? I make my move. I walk over to Tommy and sit down. I sit right next to him. He laughs a nervous laugh, then scoots over a bit and laughs again. We both fall silent. We sit there staring out at the sea. Two surfers are trying to catch a few waves. A guy on the pier is pulling up a crab and the other crabbers send up a cheer. Hey, Tommy, why here? Every day, this spot, always this spot. Well, I don't have to be anywhere else. I don't have a job, he says. I don't mention that I know that he once did. You know, that's not quite true, he adds and gives me a wink. I'm in the Coast Guard. Oh yeah? Yeah, I guard the coast. Well, don't let your guard down, I toss back and he laughs. After a moment, he says, hey, what are you sitting on? That must be his lead up to a joke. So I say in high English, well, my arse, kind sir. Well, always look down before you sit down. You never know what you'll find. Maybe he's nervous about us sitting so close, or maybe he's stuck chewing gum on the bench. I get up and make a big show of looking down where I'm going to sit, and that's when I see it. New letters inked onto the bench, my name, with a drawing of a tiny anchor. There, right there with all the others in a row, with the ink names of Surfer Dude and Crystal and the Chewer and Permit Man, with Kite Man who died of a heart attack last year, his name beginning to fade. Here it is, the proof, the acknowledgement, what I've wanted all along, to be accepted, to be in with this out crowd. Jesus, Tom, you have no idea what this means to me. no greater honor, but I can't finish and tear up. Tommy turns red, takes a swig from his can. He's embarrassed, as I am. To lighten it up, I offer him a line I learned from the Crab King. Listen, if I'm lying, I'm dying. I sit back down and put my arm around his shoulder. I don't move on. We sit there together silently for the rest of the afternoon and watch the sunset take the sky through the color spectrum, color after color after color. Who we used to be. Who we used to be. So I always get a little emotional when I read it, just it's that he's an extraordinary, that is out of a real life character too. And he's an extraordinary one. And I do often think about all of the different people that we are. Excuse me, like you, Ploi, who did you?
Thank you for reading that. I know when I first read the galley for our catapult interview, just even the placement of that story after all the iterations we saw the narrator talk about, this was like the first place where it wasn't so much that she was ever embarrassed about her past, but I think we tend to try and always progress forward. And even in writing, we tend to try and progress forward by use of scenes or action, this idea of plot that's only linked to action. But I think in this piece that you read, or this chapter, it's the energy moves by reaction, realizations until the acceptance. So instead, I think it does progress, but deep. And I think that was, for me, craft-wise, what I learned. And then obviously, emotionally, it was, yes, we carry all of these things that, we can't erase, even though we sort of try to bury it.
And they're in us. And that's also why you, with strangers, there's that initial assumption, oh, I see you and I have these, what comes up is all of these assumptions, and you don't know anything about the person. You really don't know what's underneath. This is a silly story, but I'm going to tell it because I was thinking about this, where the very first class I taught at San Francisco State, very, very first one, really, really nervous. And it's a beginning class, and I'm reading the role. And so people have to say here or present. And I read the guy's name and he says, I have to pee. and I said, okay. And then he went and he left the room. And then he came back. And so let me just say, I had a few assumptions about what he would be like the entire semester. But it turns out that actually he was a great foil. He loved Dylan Thomas. And so he would always be the guy who would make some off the wall comment. And he was actually charming, but my first initial reaction was, oh my God, what am I gonna do with him? Until I went past that initial assumption, right? Until we vaulted the near blue air between us, I guess.
The structure of the piece too, but it felt a lot like, and we've talked a little bit about this before, what waves do on a very sharp piece of glass over time, and wears away the edges and creates a kind of translucence that didn't exist before. And when I saw this character who was so resistant and so judgmental, but so vulnerable too, and unwilling to make that step forward and to sit down, in the end of that book, to sit down by the guy and to get what she'd always wanted but been too terrified to pursue, which was some sort of reciprocity.
Yes.
That was not, there was no cost except the cost of laying down your own assumptions and sitting down. But that was fabulous. But I wondered too how the ocean affects the form of this this book. And this ties in a little bit to Tony's question about the process of writing, the different writing poems and writing essays, because I do hear the rhythms, but I also hear the landscape making its presence known in the form of the work itself.
You know, that I think that's great. This is a little bit of a plug. It's outside of this, but there's a wonderful writer, Nina Schuyler, and she's going to have a book come out called Stunning Sentences, and she's doing some Substack. I don't understand Substack, but she's doing a thing where she looks at sentences, and she just did one by Toni Morrison today. She did one of mine a couple days ago. It was very lovely of her, but she was talking about sound and rhythm and that kind of almost wave-like motion of the sound pattern that is in the lines. And again, I wish I had something really thoughtful to say about it. It's just that that's how I hear it. I hear the rhythm of a longer lyrical line often, and there it's a sound pattern that just, again, I feel like it could be influenced by the sea, by being by that rhythmic wave action all the time. I'm not sure where it comes from, but that's really very much part of me, very much in me.
I wonder if Joyce too wants to kind of flesh out her question. She has it in the chat there, but Joyce, do you want to speak your question?
Sure. My question really is about process, I guess. And so I'm asking, because you write in several genres, I'm just wondering, in terms of writing these particular stories, you know, what were some similarities? And before we even get into similarities and differences, what was your process like? That's the first question for this particular collection, for these stories. And then my second question, I think, has to do with similarities and differences to writing essays, to writing poetry.
Yeah. You know, I think if the similarity, let me just go for the similarities first, is that I wrote a book called Queer Street, a poetry book called Queer Street, very much about the neighborhood that my wife and I moved into when we moved to Pacifica. It was not the most welcoming street. And those pieces are very short little, you could call them prose poems, you could call them flash fiction, you could call them tiny little stories, and there's still all of the poetic rhythms inside of the block of the prose. So I just feel like whatever, since I was a poet for a long time before I moved to prose, it just comes with me. It just simply, I used to talk to students about something called their bag of needments. Like you take your bag of needments from one genre to the next one, that I felt like the poets who became prose writers or wrote prose, their rhythms, their poetic rhythms and their poetic craft actually came into the prose. And if in fact they were prose writers and started to write poetry, in their bag of needments is that they would be able to bring in conflict and character into their poems. So I feel like it's kind of like who we used to be, actually, as in terms of genre, we carry those genre lessons with us. Does that make sense, Joyce, in some way?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Yes, thank you.
Nice to see you again, by the way. I saw you.
Thank you, same here.
Yeah.
That reminds me of what I don't know, Tempest maybe, the past is prologue. Like you can't really write the present without reference to intimately or explicitly, or you know, that's something explicitly or there's another word in there, but that the past kind of exists and is moving you forward, even if it's not referenced. And that too, each person that we encounter has these mysteries attached that they may not want to reveal.
They may not
So
want there's a great, God, I wrote it down. Now I can't find it. There's a wonderful quote from Allie Smith, and it's, I'm sorry, I can't find, listen to this. I love Allie Smith, and it's every hello, like every voice, holds its story ready and waiting. It's quite possible too, though, Mary, that every hello doesn't want to share that story, but the idea that when you start to talk to people and this happened in teaching too, in classes, people, their stories were just waiting. They're just waiting to tell, Frances Phillips is a friend of mine, a wonderful woman, and we went walking up on above the Castro the other day, and a woman came by and she started to talk to us about how she was photographing coyotes up there. And she went on, she just kept talking, and she told us many, many stories. I thought, she really needs to tell some stories. It was wonderful. It's wonderful.
That's a good story. It makes me eager. I mean, I think too, we've been so sequestered because of COVID that we hunger for encounters like this. I mean, I think that's why I have read so much during COVID, because I hunger for lives outside my own. Ploi, what is your process too? You write in several different genres. Do you find that one informs the other and back and forth, or do you find yourself fighting against the impulses of one form when you're writing another?
I do feel, for me, nonfiction, my nonfiction at least, comes from a more enraged or reactive place. And whereas my fiction is like my time to dream, and my time to experiment. And so that's why I'm also curious with, what themes always comes up for me, sort of what Toni was saying, like the body, there are certain things that I say again and again in both genres. And I think I'm still trying to figure out what that is, for them to all belong in their own manuscripts.
I just need to say, Ploi is an extraordinary writer, and you should go to her website and look at her work, because really she's something. She is really something. So just FYI.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel, is there any other questions for Toni? My other question is, Toni, what else are you working on? I know when Joyce had mentioned about what processes are from poetry to this collection, and I guess for me, it's what process from this collection to a novel?
I'm not going to go there. I'm going to leave that to you all, Mary, and you all who know how to do that. It is, I've been working on a family story about a fishing boat and father's early death, and the boat that goes out in the world, and what buoys us, what keeps us buoyed when the image and vehicle that buoyed the family is gone. Anyhow, so that's a long story, but I will tell you one last thing, and that is that I was talking to someone yesterday about this guy at the Seaview Tire shop down here. It's a tire shop, and they fix your tires, and I had a lot of nails in my tires. I don't know, we think that someone's putting nails in, I don't think so, but somehow I had to take the tires down there. And the guy has a glass jar on his counter there with all the nails that he has taken out of tires. I think that's the most wonderful thing I have ever seen in my life. It's like all of these nails in this glass jar. Now, Ploi, if I was teaching again, there would be some kind of exercise that came out of that. And then what I said to him was, when are you going to retire? I'm sorry, this is a really bad joke. When are you going to retire? He said, that's what I do. I retire. And how can I write that story? I mean, how can I write that story? It's the best story. I mean, to me, it's the best story. It's a glass jar full of like nails. What is better than that? Anyhow, okay, that's what I'm going to work on that. Okay, right after this, I'm going to work on that.
I love that story. I want to thank both of you for a tremendous discussion. And I want to encourage you too to go ahead and purchase this book at your favorite independent bookshop, or on bookshop.org, or on Libro FM, which is an audio bookshop that supports local booksellers. Also, next up at Alta Mesa Center for the Arts, we have The Encounter, a handbook on poetic practice, featuring a lot of remarkable poets. We have Ray Armentrout, Paul Hoover, and Elizabeth Robinson joining us on that day. But in between now and then, if you can, let's try to have some kind of encounter, however much courage that might take, just to sit and have these conversations. And if this book is in your bag and pocket as you do that, if you are heading to the ocean, I also encourage you to take this along. I went to Aptos for the week, and I am terrified of the ocean normally, but this book allowed me to see the place with eyes of familiarity. It was quite remarkable. So let's give a round of applause to both Ploi and Toni, and thank you all for being here. It wouldn't be a reading series without you, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ploi. Thank you, all friends who came. Really, thank you so much. Really.
Thanks. Bye.